Good morning and welcome to my blog, Wisdom for Today. So glad you came to join me just to discuss scripture for a little while. Have you ever watched the Disney cartoon of Snow White and remember the queen appearing before this grandiose mirror and eloquently saying, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" Even seeing that movie as a kid, I marveled at the fact that the cartoonist didn't make her more beautiful. I mean, surely the Disney cartoonist could have made her prettier than she was. She was kind of creepy even when she was young and portrayed as beautiful. Maybe they were trying to make the point that beauty comes from within, not from without. Or maybe the distortion that she saw in the mirror was false all along. Maybe that mirror had been lying to her. Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror and then seen a picture of yourself and marveled at the differences between the mirror's depiction of you and the picture's depiction of you? Tiffany White, who writes for an internet magazine called Distractify, talks about that there's a reason for that. She says, although mirrors show a flipped version of yourself that tones down the harshness of your asymmetries, the myth that pictures never lie isn't true either. She says because the proximity of your face to the camera, the lens can distort certain features, making them look larger than they are in real life. The reality is that both perceptions of ourselves isn't how we really look like. I guess to see what we really would look like, we'd have to see ourselves through someone else's eyes. And when we saw ourselves through someone else's eyes, we'd also see their perception of us, of who we are as a person. And I guess that goes back to true beauty coming from within. This next fall, we're doing a study called The Jesus I Never Knew. And I want to challenge you to read that book. Because oftentimes we have a distortion of who Jesus is. Now, like many of you, I have sketches of Jesus in my house and in my office to remind me of how Christ loves us. And most of these sketches, Jesus is seen comforting someone. In fact, they're called comfort prints. But I know that that sketch isn't how Jesus looked physically. I know that we don't know how Jesus looked physically. In fact, in the book of Isaiah, the scriptures are very clear that says that his appearance would be such that we would desire him not. And yet we desire him not because of his physical appearance, but because of his love in our life. In 1 Corinthians 13, which is the love chapter, it talks about us growing to know what love is, but also growing to know what God's love is. Now, in marriage ceremonies, you hear 1 Corinthians 13 all the time. A minister will start to read it. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love never wishes the wrong to win out. Love is forgiving. And when he's done reading all these aspects of love, he stops. And it's almost as if we say to this young couple, now you go do that. But they don't. They forget the two most important verses. And they're verses 11 through 13. It says, when I was a child, I used to speak like a child. I used to think as a child. I used to reason as a child. But when I became an adult, I put childish things away. So the reality is that the speaker, who's Paul, is saying, as children, we learn that we look at love one way, but we grow up in our perception of love to see it another way. And then he goes on to say, for now we see in a mirror dimly. Now we know in part, but then we will know fully, just as we'll be fully known. But now abide faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Now we see dimly as a reflection in a mirror. And it's talking about God's love. Often when I'm officiating at a wedding, I would say, marriage is for grown-ups. And you need to grow into your love for each other. And there'll be times in your marriage where you have to put away childish things and tantrums. And you have to accept adult issues and behave like an adult when you face a problem together. But that's also true with God's love, which I think Paul is really talking about in this passage. Because he says, now I see as a child. And he says, now I see in a mirror dimly. And then he's talking about when we see Jesus. Then we'll see face to face. Then we will fully know, even as we're fully known. Won't that be wonderful? Not to be misunderstood anymore, but to be fully known. When the scripture says, now I see in a window dimly, the Greek word literally means a riddle or an enigma. When it comes to Jesus, we're constantly figuring out who he is in our life. When it comes to God, we're constantly figuring out who he is in our life. Like many of you, I came to faith as a very young child, and God's love overwhelmed me then. But I'm constantly learning about what that love means to me. I'm constantly learning about what it means to rest in that love. It's a lifelong lesson. And as I put away childish things, I realize the life is not a fairy tale. It's not as sweet as Snow White finding her prince. But it's a reality of dealing with the harshness of life in God's love. If you don't have a study this coming fall, can I recommend to you to visit our Sunday school class right before church to talk about the Jesus we never knew, the Jesus we're growing into knowing, because he's the Jesus that gives us our salvation and gives us his love. I look forward to seeing you this Sunday. God's blessings and have a great day.